Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. There is a cooking series on TV, and a chef comes in, and he cooks with whatever he finds in the pantry. Now, this sounds like a very plausible TV series, but it makes for lousy everyday cooking. Let's say the chef tends to cook one type of food, and then he comes to my kitchen, and he steps into the kitchen, he opens up the pantry, and he finds mustard seeds, he finds mace, he finds hing, he finds curry leaves, he finds chilies, chana dal, and onions. Now, if you cook Indian food, you know that that list sounds pretty sensible because you can whip up a great dal recipe with these ingredients. But what about the chef? Is he even going to know what to do with all these ingredients? Because he's going to be highly unfamiliar with all of these ingredients. Today's podcast is short. It's almost like a PS to last week. And last week was about all of this research. But the most important thing that you have to note is you can't just take this research and store it away. That would make you like the chef. You would be very unfamiliar with the information. You have to get to know the story a little bit so that you can remember it weeks, months, years after you've stored it. And that's kind of the most critical point. But there is still a process. Let's find out what the process is all about. This process might involve a couple of steps or just a single step. Let's take the one step to begin with. Let's say I'm reading on my iPad or I'm reading at the computer. That's just one step because I'm going to read about, say, Mount Tambora, or I'm going to read about James Clerk Maxwell, or I'm going to read about echolocation, some topic. And I will read enough so that I can find something in that story or something in that case study. And I'm always looking for the interesting point. I'm not necessarily looking for the story. I'm looking for the interesting point in the story. And once I find that interesting point, I will then take a snapshot of it and put it into Evernote. The most important thing that I've done here, or rather two things. The first is I have waited to find the interesting point. I haven't just stored any single story that I get or any new story. There has to be something which is exciting for me, and then it'll be exciting for the reader. Then, having read it, and this is the second important point, I have to read it so that I remember, oh wait, this echolocation was about X, or this story on supervolcanoes was about Y. And I have that in the far reaches of my memory. I can't remember it all, but I have it in my memory. And so I've taken those two steps. I found the interesting point, and I've stored it away. However, most of my learning is done while on the road. I'm standing in queues, I'm walking somewhere, and I'm listening to it on audio. I'm listening to a course, I'm listening to a podcast or something like that. And at that point in time, it's very difficult to remember what exactly was said. Often, what I'll tend to do is deprive myself. I will stop it at that specific point. So something's very interesting, I will stop at that specific point. If I'm driving, I will still stop it at that specific point. I'll pull over, of course, and just stop it at that point so that when I re-engage with that audio, it will remind me where I am. But let's say I can't stop, in which case I will remember that point. I'll go, okay, so in this supervolcano story, they talked about how the human race was possibly down to 3,000 people. No, I'm not joking. That was the theory, 3,000 people. So I will keep that in my memory until I get to a point where I can connect. At that point, I will look up that bottleneck theory of 3,000 people, and then I know the story, and I will save it to Evernote. And this is how I go about most of the storage, which is to know the story, to find the interesting point, and store it into Evernote. All of these three things are important. Now, in the past, I've said that I used to put tags, and I don't do that tagging anymore. I just make sure that I know the story. Sometimes there may be a cross-reference. Sometimes the story will fit into two categories. It might fit into, say, a category like uniqueness, and it might fit into the category like pricing. Okay, so in that case, I will now use the tags so that when I look up stuff on pricing, I will find it. If I look up stuff on uniqueness, I will find it. However, by and large, all the case studies, all the examples, all the stories go into the stories folder. So the bulk of the research is usually just storing stories, examples, and case studies. The question that arises from this point is, what about the content? If you've got something that you've been researching about uniqueness, shouldn't you be going and looking up some videos and reading some books and stuff? And my simple answer to that is you already know more than enough. So if you're going to be writing about uniqueness, then there's a pretty good chance that you know enough. I went back to the earliest articles that I wrote, and I wrote about 9 articles. This is going back to the year 2001. And I found that just one of those articles were directly attributable to a book. The rest of the articles were something that I'd been thinking about, and I thought, okay, let's put this in the form of an article. And that's what I did. I just put it together in the form of an article. And if I were working today, I would have had that research, those case studies, those examples, and I would put that alongside my article. So now we have the article. Let's say we're talking about how to create your audio logo, which was one of the earliest articles. And then I would give an example from my research. And this is really what you need to do with research. A lot of people try to research the content, and you don't need to research the content. That is a spectacular waste of time. You are telling the person what you already know. Say you are in the garden and you've been growing tomatoes, and you know how to grow 1,000 tomatoes in, 1 square foot area or something like that. You already know this stuff. You just need some kind of study or backup or example or something like that. And that is really what you have been storing away. The stories, the examples, the case studies. The content is still very much your own. And that is what your reader is looking for. They are not looking for something that you found in this book and that book and this website and some other podcast. They're looking for your voice, your experience. And yes, I understand that you don't feel you're authoritative enough to say that. But no one does. Not when you're starting out. You feel like someone's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, where did you get this stuff from? How do you know this stuff? But you don't have to worry about it. Just remember, write your own content, cover 2 or 3 points, and that's pretty much it. Which brings us to the end of this extremely short podcast. What did we cover here? We first looked at something that we were reading or listening to. And at some point we hit a very interesting point, like the human race and this bottleneck theory. So let's say you were listening to this podcast, which you are, and you go, okay, that's very interesting. I should look it up. So now you go and you look up that bottleneck theory and you read a bit about it until you find something that's exciting to you, and then you save it. You put it into Evernote. If you need to tag it, that's fine. If it needs to go into category, that's fine. If you don't, you just have to remember, if you looked for bottleneck, there's a pretty good chance that there's the word bottleneck in it, and you just have to remember that one word and you will find the story again. So what we've done is we've got that interesting point, we've stored it away, and now that we're done. What about the content? The content is all your own. The voice is your own. I went through the same imposter syndrome, so I know approximately how you're feeling. But if you look at the brain audit, for instance, and you start reading those pages, that was written back in 2002, just barely years after we started. I wasn't any marketing expert. Not that I'm a marketing expert now, but still, that book had mostly personal examples. It had talk about dog poo and chairs and cop cars chasing you and stuff like that. And it had only one point of research, and that too I found by chance. So that's it. That brings us to the end of this podcast. You know what to do. Go find the interesting point in the story. That's the one thing that you really need to do. Find the interesting fact in the story, because that is what you need to start with, and then all the rest will fall in line. You have good ideas. You might not be where you need to be in terms of your writing, but you have good ideas. Put those ideas down, and then over time you will see that your writing, your ideas, your whole collation process will change. And then you might have 910 stories to choose from as well. Well, that was it. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. So the first thing that's happening in Psychotactics land is you probably missed the article writing course home study, because that was today. Well, if today happens to be the 13th of October. And if you missed it, there are still goodies, just like this information about article writing. So there are lots of goodies. So go to that page, the home study course page, and you will find that there are goodies there, and you get about 6 goodies. They're pretty much worth it, so go for it. Go there and sign up for the goodies. I'll be in Australia from the 18th, and I'm speaking at the Amplify event, and I'm talking about my pet topic, which is talent, and it's called the talent equation. So that's what I'm doing. But right now, I'm in the process of writing the notes for the sales page course, and we're going to have a home study version of that. We don't have any dates yet, but it'll be next year. And we might have a live course. We are definitely going to have the home study. We'll see how it goes. Finally, there is going to be the info products course. I've been putting it off for a while. And at least Joseph from Singapore has been bugging me for a long time. But it's not going to be in Singapore. It's going to be in Frankfurt. And this is April 2019. And I already announced it to the little WhatsApp group that already attended the sales page course, and many of them are quite keen to attend the next course. Anyway, that's what's happening in Psychotactics land. We'll speak to you soon. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. And yes, find that story. Find the interesting part of that story. Bye-bye. Still listening? This story collation process can be sped up. We'd done 2 courses, one in Amsterdam and one in Nashville. And it was a storytelling course. So everyone was storing stories, right? And so I paid for a second Evernote account, and everyone had instructions that as they find a story while at the workshop, and even for days after, weeks after the workshop, they could put it in that Evernote account. And so that's what people did. They started putting story after story after story after story. And then we went to Amsterdam, same Evernote account. Now we have a whole bunch of people putting story after story. How useful was it? It was totally useless. Totally useless. And the reason for that was exactly what I started this podcast with, which is that you have to be familiar with it. You have to be familiar with the story, just like the chef needs to be familiar with the ingredients. Otherwise, it's very difficult to cook something to get that article going. And that was the problem. The problem was you can't just store stories. And we didn't know that. And we learned that after doing these 2 workshops. So there's your little psychotactic story for the day. We hope to see you soon in 5000 BC. And I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye.